time, so let's go ahead and get this presentation started. I'm David Lamb, Director of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. Very exciting to have everybody here with us this morning. ISR is a world leader in social sciences. We're very proud of our very content-rich research enterprise, which addresses very policy-relevant topics such as aging and health, teen drug use, economic behavior, wealth and inequality, race and racism, politics, and many other topics. We also have state-of-the-art expertise in surveys and survey design, data archiving, and training the next generation of social scientists. ISR has over 300 faculty members with appointments all across the University of Michigan campus, a reflection of the true interdisciplinary nature of our work at ISR. It's great to have so many of you here with us for this virtual event. In an effort to remain connected with our faculty, staff, donors, and friends during this time, I'm very pleased today we're launching our ISR Insights Speaker Series to discuss ISR research that is particularly relevant during this global pandemic. We'll be holding a virtual event every 2 weeks or so, and we will post information on our website and on social media, so check those places out to stay connected. Future presentations will address the social impact of COVID-19 on areas such as education, economics, racial disparities in health, and so on. We'll also have other topics that are particularly relevant in the world right now and where we have strong expertise, including topics such as race, politics, economics, and elections, and a variety of other important social issues. Very pleased to introduce our first speaker in the series, Dr. Pam Davis-Kean. Pam is Professor of Psychology and Research Professor in ISR. Pam's research focuses on the various pathways that the socioeconomic status of parents relates to the cognitive and achievement outcomes of their children. Her primary focus is on parental educational attainment and how it can influence the development of the home environment throughout childhood, adolescence, and the transition to adulthood. Pam has many, many titles and roles at the university, so I encourage you to Google her if you'd like to learn more about her very impressive career and research. In our talk today, Pam will talk about her research on the inequalities in educational opportunities and what that means for families, schools, and children as this pandemic is potentially increasing achievement gaps across the country. Note that this event is being recorded, and also note that we will have Q&A at the end of Pam's presentation. I invite you to send in any questions you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to have Pam answer these questions before our time ends. So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks very much to Pam for kicking off this exciting series, and enjoy the presentation. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, David. So today I'm going to be talking about something that 2 weeks ago when we talked about me presenting had just been something I had been talking about that we were going to have, and data was starting to come out, some real challenges for the fall K through 12. We're also dealing with this at the college level, but I'm going to be talking about this for secondary, primary and secondary schooling, of what it meant for children across the United States, across the world, but I'm looking at the United States, having left formal schooling, the actual institution of schooling, and going into the home environment where they were Zooming like we are now, but sometimes not, and being connected and sometimes not to their schools, and what does that mean? And a lot of this is based on something that we've been looking at for a long time in issues of education, which is what happens to kids when they take off large amounts of time, mostly during the summer, from school. And we had seen that, and research, and I'm going to show you this, has shown it what we call the summer slump. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're really concerned about this, and why we're focused on ideas, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end, of what maybe we can do and think about. So just to overview the talk quickly, I'm going to talk about why are we worried about children being out of formal schooling, out of the institutions of schools. Why are we concerned about this moving to the home environment, particularly me, because that's what I study? And then what can we do about COVID-19 this fall, and what's kind of happened with kids being out of schooling? So what's the problem? So right now, this is the most recent 2019 data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's called the Nation's Report Card. And what's continued to be disturbing has nothing to do with COVID-19, but our ongoing issues of educational inequality is the fact that in 2019, we saw a stable non-growth in mathematics, still at a pretty low level of proficiency. This is just pretty low levels of proficiency. So no change between 2017 and 2019, and a decrease in reading. Which we weren't expecting because, as many of you know, and the state of Michigan has these policies now, there are lots of interventions on reading. So our expectation is not to see decreases in reading, but increases. But in 2009, proficiency actually went down across the United States. This is my research that looks at the achievement gap, and this is looking particularly at math, but reading looks very similar to this. And what I want to talk about here, and why we're kind of worried about this problem, are these gaps that you're seeing. This is across all race groups, and you may not be able to see it very clearly, but at the bottom it says K through 5th, so this is looking at 5th grade. And what I want you to see in this, and something I talk a lot about, and it has to do with the home environment, is that the gaps we see in achievement are not created in schools. These gaps exist prior to schooling. So at entry, there are differences in the kids in classrooms between those who are achieving quite high and those who are achieving quite low. Schooling is our primary intervention across the board. When it started in the Industrial Revolution, schools were created to create both good citizens, but also people capable of going into our workforce. What we see is that in general, achievement, which is what we hope to see, continues to go up, but not very much for those who started low. And the gap that was there at entry remains all the way through schooling. So some of the gaps reduce for some of the higher ones, but they generally stay the same. So, and this is to 5th grade. I can tell you I've looked at this in 8th grade and further, and it stays the same. Actually, it widens. You can see at 5th grade, it's widening. As soon as you get into high school, the difference between the highest achievers and the lowest are even larger. These gaps are predicted by socioeconomic status difference. So all the gaps you see here relate to parents' own schooling, educational attainment, as well as their income. So these are the gaps we've been dealing with for a long time. We talked about race gaps. The race gaps have actually gone down across time, but the socioeconomic status differences have remained the same or have grown across actually the last decade. So these are what we're already dealing with in the situation that we have. This is a model I use that kind of talks about, it's from the larger Bronfenbrenner model, but specifically talks about how parents and teachers provide most of the information for achievement and regulation for kids across time. So this is a really important difference that parents in the United States, this is not true globally, but certainly in the United States, provide most of from birth to about 5 years of age, 5 to 6 years of age, the primary education for a child, which is in the home environment. Then starting with compulsory schooling at kindergarten, that moves to another adult, which is generally the teachers, and remains that way through the rest of the time for schooling. What happens in the United States is we have something called informal education, where the parents in the home are expected, and if they have the resources, to provide additional, on top of the regular schooling, additional schooling that can take the form of tutoring, going to special after-school programs, these things that enhance the schooling of a lot of kids. So what happened with COVID-19? Well, when COVID-19 came in, the separation of the parents kind of handing off the education to the formal education environment, the schools, it created this breakage, right? So now the parents provided birth to 5 years of age schooling, but then the schooling moved back into the home. And one of the things that I noted to you was that what happens, let me go back. What happens is this, right? So if it's going back into the home environment, then the socioeconomic status differences that are in the home environment are still impacting the children And maybe more so because now, instead of having a separate institution whose entire goal is to separate, for learning and for training kids to learn, now you have a home environment where parents are often working, and I'll come back and talk about that later. So they're still going to work themselves, and they're having to get their kids online for the schools and provide what most parents are now calling homeschooling. There's not a person I've talked to who hasn't talked about the fact that they are doing primary teaching for their kids, because it's often not fulfilled right now. This was all very fast. It was all very quick. We didn't have systems in place for moving from the school environment back to the home environment as the primary learning environment. And parents are taking a big hit. And you can imagine, if you have these differences in socioeconomic status, that this is a real problem. So what do I look at? So this is a model that I use, which is the family resource model. I have a variation on it that talks about the fact that socioeconomic status indicators like education and income, as you can see in the model, relate to parental beliefs about college attendance, whether or not your child is going to go on to college or whether they're going to graduate from high school. This leads to parenting behaviors in this case, and I look at lots of them, but this example is reading, play, and warmth, and then that predicts to a standardized test, in this case, the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement. I've looked at this in multiple studies. This particular one comes from the panel study of Income Dynamics, Child Development Supplement, where I want to see whether or not education is promoting reading and play and warmth. The answer is it does. It does it differentially for different race groups, but education, the parents' education attainment, matters for what kind of behaviors they're providing for the kid in the home. So the more resources you have, the more educational resources you have, the more you're providing for your kid. You're taking them out to museums, you're doing activities with them in the home, you're providing all kinds of what we call cognitively stimulating events. You're reading out loud to them, you're helping them learn how to read. The warmth is really parental sensitivity. When the child needs something to do, you're responding to the child in order to do that. And you can imagine how all of this now plays out when we move back into the home environment. If those are behaviors that for some parents, they don't have the time. If they're working, they don't provide these behaviors. Some of them would like to, and they don't have the opportunity to do so. Some don't see their role as a parent as being someone who plays with their kid or plays games with their kids. So it really differs across how people think about their role of parenting. But we do know that the higher the education, and I have a paper that shows increases in educational attainment going back to school, also increases the likelihood of these cognitive stimulating behaviors as well. So again, I was just pointing out that as soon as it goes back to the home, you see these differences, and that those differences in the home and the socioeconomic status differences, this is with formal schooling. This is why we're worried. Now we're going back into the home where we know that there are these large socioeconomic status differences. People have different knowledge of how to provide resources for their kids. They have different access to resources based on socioeconomic status. So we're really concerned, I'm concerned, this is my research, that as soon as we go back into the home, I've talked about this even with homework, you can't have the expectation that parents can provide the kind of schooling that people who've been trained to provide this education can provide. So what we're using as a model to talk about these issues is what has been called the summer achievement gap. So many of you have heard about this, or what we call the slump. It's been somewhat debated. This is a national study, the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, where we were looking at it. So what is the slump? So in general, when kids go to school, you see increases. This is low poverty schools and high poverty schools. Everyone's achieving. That's what we should see. But over the summer months, which can range from 2.5 to 3 months, we see a little bit of a lag, right? So the kind of linear increase is now flattening a little bit, not too much, but does take a hit. And then we see it again, perhaps flattening even more the further up. This is just going from kindergarten to second grade. We see that beginning to flatten. As you recall from the earlier slide, I was showing that you start seeing this fanning or achievement from these two different groups beginning to pull apart from each other. And some people have shown that it is part of this summer loss. So kids, all kids, and you can see this in this figure, all kids in schooling are losing achievement across time. It's just that the ones that are in the low poverty schools both start off higher and seem to rebound faster. So in the fall, when everyone's going back and in the first September and October, you're reviewing all the materials that you actually finished with in May and June, and you're just getting everyone caught up. There's some that are going to still be lagged behind. Part of that has to do with the summer activities. So for kids who are in low poverty schools, they often come from highly resourced environments. They're going to camps, they're taking specialized, many of you are probably thinking about this now because we also are losing our summer camps, that they are going to have these really kind of cognitively stimulating summer experiences as well. They're also going to be reading, and they're going to be going and doing kind of reading camps and library related types of things. But parents are going to make sure that they have a lot of stuff going on all of the time. That kind of activity enhances achievement, and it certainly doesn't decrease it, right? So when those kids come back, they have a tendency to rebound and get back kind of on this learning trajectory much more quickly than kids that are coming from lower resourced environments that may not have the ability to go to these much more highly enriched summer camps or summer camps at all. They may be sitting at home because summer camps cost money. One of the things I talk about coming back to the home environment, so our compulsory schooling provides for everybody. So everyone gets to go to school, everybody gets 9 months of schooling, 9 to 10 months of schooling. But during the summer, prior to entry to school, anything about preschool or anything you're getting is based on the socioeconomic status of a parent in the United States. So whether you can afford a preschool or you can put your kid in something cognitively stimulating, the exact thing happens in the summer. So once schools are no longer open, it now comes back into the home environment, and now it matters how much money you have, how much education you have, even if you don't have money, as to the kind of things that you're providing for your kid. So these are things that we've worried about all along, is that as soon as we don't have public schools available, and we don't have them available all the time, then it matters how much education and how much money you have. This is all leading to the issue that we have with what people are beginning to call the COVID-19 slump, what we're really concerned about. This is data that just came out. So some of you are very familiar with the NWEA or the MAP test that kids are taking. They take it here in the state of Michigan, and they take it around the country. It ended up being that that test was being given just as schools were beginning to close. And because they had data, they were able to take that data and project to what they think might be the issue in the fall. So this was all of the concerns about what happens when schools formally close, and now all of the cognitive stimulation and achievement activities are moving back into the home environment. So as you can see, the real concern they have is they're projecting into the fall. So the pink one is kind of the typical fall. This is where kids are starting with what is the summer slump. So we already have that, but added to it now for this year, we're concerned that there's going to be an additional problem, a reduction in achievement at school entry in the fall, for math especially. As you can see for reading, it doesn't look that bad. It looks like it's holding around about the same summer slump. Again, scores are going down across the board, but it doesn't look that different. And their thoughts on this were that kids are still reading, and they still have access to materials, and those are the kind that are being provided, but they don't have access to math instruction. This is a problem in general in the public schools. Many of you know this. We have formal reading interventions that are at the district level, at the state level, and at the federal level. There is nothing similar or complementary to that in math. So we have if a district is doing it, it's because they've chosen to do it. If a state is doing it, it's because they've chosen to do it, and there is no federal math intervention. So math is kind of left up to the kid, the parent, and the teacher to do, and we can see that it's taking the biggest hit on achievement. So schooling may be particularly effective for math learning, whereas we see very little hit on reading. But this is the kind of data that's coming out that's concerning everyone. What are we going to do in the fall? So at first I was going to say, we don't really know. We don't really have any solutions or advice because we're dealing with this as researchers at almost exactly the same time parents are dealing with it. So what kind of advice? But I decided not to kind of wimp out on this issue and instead try to use some of the information that I have from my own research and from what I know about the broader educational research to think about how are we going to deal with this in the fall. This is a problem. It's an issue for everybody across all socioeconomic status. There's going to be more so of this issue because, as I said, there were resources available for all SES levels. The higher socioeconomic status levels, those with higher education and income, were more likely to take advantage of these. But everyone now does not have access to these activities. So what kids have access to are their own parents who can help, and they have, and people have been spreading this information on social media. Hey, I've got this, why don't you try this? Why don't you go buy this? I've tried to use this kind of information to keep their kids stimulated. I talked to a parent the other day who said, I'm literally resorting to taking them out and teaching them bird watching, anything I can do that gets them out of the house and trains them, because we didn't have anything in the house that was for formal schooling. We're getting some stuff from the schools, but not that much. And parents are really having a hard time getting their kids to even turn on much of the education materials they have because they're in the home environment. This isn't usually the kind of place they have to worry about, right? When we drop them off at school, actually going to a physical building creates a context where kids know what they're going to be doing for the next 6 hours. The home environment is generally a place of relaxation, hanging out with the family, maybe doing some homework. But now the home environment has become that, plus the schooling environment, but there's no clues to the kid that they need to be doing what they did for the teacher for the parent. And so there's a lot of, I know many of you have told me about a lot of screaming and yelling, intense conversations about sitting down and getting the schoolwork done. But there's also parents that are just kind of giving up. We're all overwhelmed and you're just hoping it will all be fine. So what are some solutions and advice? All right, so we're going to have to do two things. The very first thing is we're going to have to worry about catching up. So how are we going to help the kids in the fall catch up with what we're worried about is this projection of lower achievement. So test scores, these are standardized test scores going down across time. One of the things I've thought of is that we can create a local, state, and national tutoring system. So retired teachers, teachers in training, retired university professors. This has been tried before and in other places where people come in and spend the evenings or time off, kind of off times in the school environment, helping kids catch up, doing additional work that they need to be doing. So we may need to pull on our larger community and say, can we provide additional tutoring to help kids? This could even just be reading, like spending time reading for kids who need to catch up on reading and pronouncing words. One of the things that I talk a lot about, because I'm a developmental psychologist, is that education is based not on the development of the kids. So K through, or birth through 5 years of age, we worry a lot about the age of the kid and how they're developing across time. Then they go into formal schooling and everything moves from kind of the developmental individual level of the kid to grade proficiency. So we say there's something special about entering and ending kindergarten, starting and ending first grade. But the kids are still the same. They're still individually kind of scoring. They don't become a first grader just because you call them a first grader, and their achievement doesn't match the proficiency just because you say that it should match the proficiency. So we have an opportunity to really think about this. It's not consistent with how we look at achievement, that that kids will end up being somewhere at the end of first grade. Instead, it's about the individual. What did the kid come in with? As you remember the huge achievement gaps. In a classroom, you could have a child performing 2 to 3 grade levels above and a child not performing at grade level at all. Those are all the same kids in the same classrooms. So we have an opportunity to really do these individualized education plans for each child. And that means testing them as they're coming into the fall, finding out where they are in achievement, and then creating a plan for them for the year. To figure out where they need to have their skills addressed. What skills seem to be problematic, and what do they need potentially this extra tutoring system on. So this is a way to kind of catch up or get to the kind of proficiency levels that we hope our kids to be at. And I imagine if we did this, we'd actually see other improvements as well, including increases in reading and math, because we'd have it based on what the kids are actually doing and need to learn, instead of this kind of bigger, oh, on today's date, we have to be on fractions. So whether you know the basic underlying math for fractions, everyone has to do fractions today, because by the end of the school year, we have to show proficiency on fractions, even if you don't know how to do multiplication or division. So again, it's putting all these kids on these individual education plan idea. Have both online and physical curriculum. So how do we sustain? So I think we're all worried about the fact that we get the kids to school, maybe we'll be lucky. And classes, and I know schools are planning on trying to start, but then what happens if we see the increase that people are worried about in November? So we have to prepare over the summer to think about what it means that, and be more prepared than we ever were. I think everyone has to give everyone space and time off for what happened this year. We did everything in a crisis mode because we had to, but now we have some time to think about it. How can we provide online and physical curriculum materials that can go home? And why am I talking about physical curriculum materials? Because even though broadband was made available to all the kids in schooling, it didn't mean that they have parents at home and or reliable broadband enough to do some of the curriculum. So we're going to have both physical curriculum available to go home as well as online. I've talked to parents here in Ann Arbor who have been very concerned about just going online. They have to log into 5 different types of curriculum. If they're going to do math, they have to log into the math site. If they're going to be doing reading, they have to log into the reading site. And that this is getting confusing for them as well as their kids. So trying to think about how people can log into the school and log into their classroom and get the curriculum that they need, and instead of having to go through multiple login problems. So these are all things we should work out in order to try to sustain. If we get back in the fall, we're able to help with catch up. If we have to leave the school environment again, how can we help sustain that? And then there need to be consistent and persistent interactions in schools. There was a New York Times article that some of you might have read that showed that depending on where you were in the country, some kids were getting constant back and forth with the teachers, but others were not. Some kids had left school in March and had no contact with teachers whatsoever because the teachers also were dealing with issues. And remember, teachers also have kids at home. So now they're having to do their job and also teach their own kids at home. So both of these things are happening. So now we need to figure out, how can we have contact? The kids need contact with the teachers. They need contact with the learning environment. So how can we make sure that's sustained and have it for everyone across all socioeconomic statuses? And then we need to be aware that parents are working at home, and they are trying to figure out how to make these two things possible. So how can kids go to school and can do that without the parents having to monitor that and provide homeschooling? So those are the two things that I can think about that would be useful and to help out and to figure out this summer. It's really something we have to figure out before the fall, because if we have to, again, leave because the virus has had an uptick, then we want to make sure we don't lose the connection that we did this year, and hope to keep the slump from coming in over and over again, because it just means we have to climb out of that each time and figure out how to help the kids do that. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the current research I'm doing, and then I'm going to end this and hopefully answer some of your questions. One of the things I work on is not just doing surveys and collecting information on how parents are doing, but also seeing kind of in time how parents are dealing with the situation. And I do this through looking at social media. So parents are spending a lot of time on social media. They're searching Google, they're doing other types of things to try to get information about what they should be doing, how they can help their kids, how they can enrich the schooling environment. So this summer, we're going to be looking at a lot of that. What have people, what have some of the people on social media, what have they been looking for? We know that this is going to be related to the socioeconomic status. Those who do use social media are already savvy about how to use it and how to get resources. How are they using it to get additional resources? That'll probably help us understand why some kids do show the slump and other kids don't show the slump. So we're going to be looking at that. We're also going to be looking at some of how they use and search for things. We're also concerned, and I said this before, about the stress of trying to manage these two roles of parent and teacher. So we're going to also be using social media to try to capture the stress that the parents are feeling about trying to manage their two roles, and how they've talked about it, how they're reaching out to get help from other parents and teachers as they've tried to manage this, and kind of what does it mean. There are a lot of parents who are like, okay, today we are literally just going to cook together because that's the best I can do today. I can't sit down and figure out or help my child figure out this problem. And so I'm just going to do what I can. And I think that's just true for all the parents. We have to give everybody, parents, kids, teachers, a break because this is unprecedented as a crisis. And all we have to do is get prepared for next year. So that's all I had to share with you today. Thank you for coming to this. For those of you who are looking for where this will be, it'll be on YouTube. There will also be Twitter information about the upcoming ones. You can find ISR on Facebook. There will be events coming up, and if you're interested in any kind of topic, please contact the communications office. If you have any questions about the studies, I am going to provide the publication information for this. You can contact me directly. I'm also on Twitter, and this is my webpage. If you have any questions, a lot of my publications are already up there if you want to go to, and they're already linked to the actual publications. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions at this point.
Pam, this is Anna. There are some questions in the Q&A section.
Okay.
If you'd like me to ask them, or if you want to read them, let me know.
Okay, I can see them. I won't be able to, let's see. I'm just going to answer them as they come. There's a thing that says answer them live, type the answer. Yeah. In relation to the achievement gap across ethnicity groups, what is driving this? Is there a role of technology, poverty here, accessibility, parent-child competency, and using this to access their education? So it is the case that there's two things going on. So we know that education, and in this case, we generally look at those with college education and those without, seems to play a role in understanding the use of technology. So that could be playing a role. There's also, so a lot of people, when I talk to them, they're like, well, they can just get online. And many of us forget that broadband, we remember monthly when we get the bill, but we forget that broadband service is really expensive. We complain about that a lot. So you can imagine if you're working paycheck to paycheck, having broadband access is actually something pretty difficult to have. So a lot of people are just using their phones. They might be smartphones, they may be flip phones. So technology isn't universal. And even though everybody thinks we have access to it, we don't. But the places that we do have access to it are the schools and the libraries. But again, both the schools and the libraries are closed right now. So some parents utilize the libraries to get assistance, and the libraries do help. They use the schools. But again, we have a problem with that. So it's both income, as it always is, it's both income and education. So your understanding of how to use it, but also having the resources to do so. Second question. Feel free to, if you want more on that, to keep asking. I'll just keep going down. How do you think parents who may have traditionally relied on support services for their children, tutors, how they cannot currently access may respond to being a home educator? I think this has come up, and people have asked me, especially as this relates to kids with special education needs. There have been a lot of people trying to do Zoom-related tutoring or video conferencing tutoring. It has not worked as far as I've heard. They're one-to-one with someone, and actually sometimes you have to correct the way they're pronouncing something, and you have to do that by manipulating their mouth or do other types of things that are helpful. Also, just generally being warm and close to someone is nice, and we can't do that right now. So people are losing out on that extra tutoring. People are very concerned about kids that already had special needs are going to even have more because they haven't gotten access to this. So being a home educator when you're not trained and haven't been able to learn the techniques is even more difficult. So that's something we definitely have to figure out, and figure out how we can do either with 6 foot distance. So now that we have both mask and 6 foot differences and some ideas about how we can think about being around people, we may have to figure out how to do that. I've also talked to people about, and some of you have seen this probably, masks that are clear, so that people who need to read lips or use the mouth as an indicator of emotion can utilize that as well. So we're going to have to think about how to do that in the future. But right now, I think those parents are feeling this even more than other parents might be feeling it. Does the slump model include a delineation between the students forget over the summer, so classroom content, and the volume of new learning impacting the child over the summer? It doesn't look at that. It's literally looking at achievement scores. So, so you don't necessarily know if it's related to the classroom content or kind of what they're getting over the summertime, though we don't see as much of a slump for the kids who we know are in summer camps and doing stuff almost weekly. Some people have been trying to do that with time diary research to try to figure out where kids are. But again, a lot of times with this research, the socioeconomic status of parents' educational attainment and income tell us almost as much as kind of these individual information get. But it is important to understand kind of what the content is, like what are they losing. So in this case, it might be that just any enrichment is better than no enrichment, and it's not specific to the content that they're getting. But we do see, again, some kids not slumping at all and other kids going down quite a bit depending on what their summer activities are. We are seeing supply side issues with teachers attempting to provide distance learning, spotty internet service, teachers driving to school parking lots to hook up with their classes, essentially teaching in their cars. We're also seeing school assignment packets delivered in grocery store chains so that students without internet can obtain hard copy versions. Have you looked at these issues? We have not looked at these issues. These are the issues we will be looking at. And as you saw in the things that I thought could be helpful, these are the things that we're going to have to be doing. So if we do get a second wave of the virus that involves us having to then quarantine again, we're going to have these pretty clearly set out so that everyone knows exactly how things are going to go. Right now, it's pretty haphazard, and I think that's one of the problems. So one of the things you do note in this, I was talking a lot about the children's socioeconomic status, but there's also the teachers, and they don't necessarily have great broadband internet at their homes either. And so some of them are sitting out in McDonald's parking lots and school parking lots trying to hook up so that they can see their classes. So it's going to be a major issue for us to figure out how to overcome the resource income issue related to broadband access. So it could be that the schools are going to have to set up offices where the teachers are going to be able to go and be able to provide this schooling as well. But imagine if they have their own kids, they too are also going to have childcare to go do this. So each of these things have to be worked out so that we know how people can safely go back in the school. And again, if we have to leave that school environment, how we can make sure we don't have the kind of problematic situation or haphazard situation we have now. Do you project a social emotional gap for students, especially in the transition years? I'm a 6th grade teacher and worried about the usual emotional struggles of new middle schoolers being greatly amplified. Yes, I think we're starting to see some of this come out already in some of the research that kids are, even more so than the adults, are taking a social emotional hit from this. So one of the parts of education that is provided pretty strongly and that they don't get is both interactions with their peers and interactions with another warm adult, which are provided in the schooling environment. I've talked to also people, one of the nice things about the schooling environment is they pick up on issues in the home and they're very helpful for making sure kids get resources. And right now that's all gone back to the home environment as well. So we are expecting, just like we're seeing with adults, and we may see this even more with children, to see mental health and socio-emotional issues as they transition back to school. It's going to be kind of a strange fall. And so I think we have to be ready for everything that we're going to be dealing with, but certainly supporting them with their socio-emotional activities as well as their achievement. What about the dual roles of teachers as well? We have staff in the UK still in school supporting key worker children and also supporting kids online. So yeah, teachers are being asked to do a lot. This is why no single teacher and the way we have to think about going back into the fall should not be on the back of any single teacher. We have to have a systematic way of addressing this, and it needs to be bringing in lots of other resources. Even if it's volunteer resources, this is something that we have to get kind of set in stone so that we don't have a single person going in and helping the kids who need specific issues from the school environment, but then also having to deal with teaching their class at the same time. So these are the kind of plans that have to start coming into place. Otherwise, we're just going to have chaos. And we have time to plan. So the beauty of the summer is we have some time to plan. So hopefully we're doing that. I know Michigan has a commission trying to look at that now. How do teachers balance the need to catch students up academically in the fall while focusing on their mental health too? Well, I can tell you that teachers do both of those every day anyway in the classroom. So a lot of the issues of kids regulating their behavior, being calm, not blowing up at each other, those are all mental health issues. And kind of calming them down, sitting them down into a learning environment is the daily situation with teachers. So they're always balancing academics, mental health, and behavior regulation. So those will continue to be a problem. What will be interesting, I think, which I'm not sure what I would predict at the moment, are kids coming in from a heavily now home environment back into the context of schooling. Will they immediately kind of go back to being regulated in the schools, as we see a lot with kids knowing what the rules of schooling are? Or will there be also this kind of slump in behavior? And so now the teachers kind of have to retrain on the rules of school about kind of being quiet, working on your work, and how you go from the cafeteria and back. So that we might see that as well, that we have some retraining that has to go on both academically as well as socio-emotionally and behaviorally. I know a lot of this research is about early education, but do you have any sense of how SES might affect or not affect higher education enrollment in the fall? I don't know. We were expecting that it might impact the college. I know that Michigan is looking at University of Michigan is looking at that very clearly. We are a little bit worried about the summer slump as well for the college students, right? So many of them have also been out. Nicely, one of the beauties of being a college student is that you become regulated and have to deal with whether you're going to study or take a test already. And so many of them are already in that mode. But I think it is going to be, and we're going to have kind of a fear factor coming back as well. But I do think that those who have supports at home, and I have to go back to this internet connectivity. If they were able, the only way that we were teaching was online. If they had problems with connectivity, they might have had problems getting on our classes. Every professor I know did everything they could to adapt to that. So, but we may have that problem again, and we're going to have to worry about what our students have access to. And I know the university spent a lot of time trying to make sure that if there were issues with our students being able to get access, that we worked with them to try to figure out how to do that. And that's going to have to continue in the fall as well. With the summer slump in mind, and with such a large percentage of the school year lost, could the pandemic serve as a catalyst to more year-round schooling moving forward? It certainly could. It's interesting about schooling. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out why we historically do what we do. We're still very much on the agricultural system that we haven't had for 100 years or so, that students needed the summer off in order to go work on the farms and help their families out. And that's not really the case anymore as far as the primary way that families are making money. But we haven't changed from that system. And teachers are hired for 9 months instead of 12 months. And so they have 3 months off where they have to provide for getting paychecks from somewhere else. This has never seemed kind of right to what we do with these kind of large periods of time off. So this might be a time of thinking about, which is why some of you have heard about year-round schooling. Other people have done it. The interesting thing about year-round schooling is many of them actually aren't year-round. They're exactly the same amount of days. They just kind of drag out the times of which you have these kind of huge breaks, whether it be a month off in December or 3 weeks off at various places. But it does, learning isn't something that that we need 2 months off on. It's something we do constantly. And so I think it might actually serve as a catalyst for us to rethink education in general, which hasn't actually been rethought in a really long time. We've just kept kind of going forward with the system that we've had for a long time with no changes. What role do you see education mass media, TV programming play in mediating the COVID-19 slump? We know that low SES families spend more time with screen media. There is also a lot of evidence that low SES kids benefit from more than high SES from educational programs like Sesame Street. Is there something we can do to encourage more educational media in the home? Well, I can tell you right now, there's a lot of media going on in the home. There is, and you've been very clear about this, it's absolutely right, that the media research on it really doesn't show much change for kids that are at the higher SES. And for low SES, it's really, if you think about Sesame Street and some of these other ones, it's the repetition of hearing sounds, letters, words, and numbers that's really helpful for kids that don't have that already in the home. We've seen kind of disappointingly that there's a lot that we thought would be passed forward in these educational programs that aren't. But if they do have, there's a reason why Sesame Street does lots of repetitive information. If it's a repeat and a kind of low level, and what I mean by that is that this is primarily for young kids. So they're learning how to spell, how to count, and that they do pick this up. But for many kids, the educational programming isn't seeing huge changes in their educational achievement. That could be something that we could utilize if we figure out exactly how to mimic some of the learning in the learning environment, but we're still struggling with that. We haven't really overcome how we can use other media or even Zoom things to help with people figuring out how to increase achievement. But certainly something to keep working on. I like your idea of individualized education plans. Oops, sorry, as soon as something comes on, I lose my thing. How do you see the implementation of this working, especially in terms of barriers to resources? So there's already educational, individualized education plans for kids who have special needs. And I think it's utilizing that system and making that true for everyone, and thinking more about looking at what is the reading level, what is the math level. We started to move to these, and the MAP test, as much as people may hate it, is an individualized test. And what that means is that we find out what kids know at each level and each time point, which gives us an insight as to what they might be missing. And that information isn't really used that way. It's used the way we've kind of used standardized achievement tests at the end of the year, which is like, are you proficient or are you not proficient? And what we need to do is use the information of what do you understand and what do you not understand. That's the part of the test that we haven't been using. And so these individualized education plans, along with these achievement tests that give individualized information about every kid, could be combined to figure out what kind of information they need. And what are they missing? Like, are they problematic, having problems with addition, but they have counting down? So what we need to be really working on is addition and not counting. And this is a pretty common issue. I have a student who just defended her dissertation that was looking at this. Lots of kids already know how to count coming into kindergarten, and that's what they do most of that year instead of going on to learning about, simple addition. So those are the kind of things we can find out. And if we combine those together, then I think we can create plans for each of the kids. Then if we do have to go into quarantine again, we already know what the plan is, and we can give the parents a very clear idea of what the next steps are, instead of, well, we're hoping that you can get to this point so that this kid can be proficient in this. Many of the kids are proficient, but we need to know where they're not. There should be no reason why we're holding kids back because they can't read at third grade proficiency. We should have known that much earlier, and we should have been addressing that much earlier. So how do we do that? What are they missing? What do they need? Sorry if I'm missing some things that are coming through. I was relying on my 9th grader to work on her online stuff. Recently, one night she said, "Mom, I have a lot on my mind." I felt terrible as a parent. I opted for 1 week of EFMLA and then some amount of furlough to make sure I can help her. Again, it's not easy because it takes time to warm up to a teenager to start engaging more closely in education. That's right. I think this is exactly what's happening, is parents are having to make choices between being the teacher and being the parent and being the worker. And it all happened at once. And we have no guidelines for how you would go about doing that. How do you do your 8-hour work week and your 8-hour education for teaching and all your other roles at the same time? And so parents are going nuts trying to combine those right now. And I feel like they're just doing the best they can. And that's all we can ask of them. Unfortunately, we still have expectations that are being set. We're seeing that there's going to be these differences that are coming in. Some parents are still essential workers and are leaving every day, and their kids have to take care of themselves and figure out how to use these systems yourself. So it really is, it's hard. So I think the best we can do is just figure out what we can do in the future and just be okay with whatever the situation is right now. We can't change it, but we can figure out how to deal with how we're going to go into the future. Just want to check my time. Okay, have about 6 more minutes. I will try to answer these questions afterwards. I'm not sure where, but I'll try to figure it out for those of you who have asked questions, because I see we have a lot. How is the pandemic affecting academic self-perceptions or children's attitudes toward math and reading getting undermined by frustrating experiences at home? If so, will going back to school help those attitudes? Gee, I don't know. I do study self-perceptions. And I think right now the perception is how frustrated they are with their parent for making them do stuff that they would rather go watch TV or play or do something else, which is what they usually do in their home. So we'll have to see how those perceptions go. They could certainly go up. They could value math and reading. They could value their schools more by being away from them. I know I'm valuing a lot of things that I don't think I valued as much, like going to work every day. So it could be that these go up, that they realize that going to school actually helps them, and it increases, and they believe that's where they're going to learn math and reading, and so their self-perceptions go up. We can hope for some positives instead of just negatives in the future. What can we do to help relieve kids' stress? Our homeschool schedule has to work around my work schedule. There are kids in different grades as well. I find that the kids are at times crying over their assignments as they feel overwhelmed. I'm not their parent, but I am family. I'm very worried about them falling behind. I think those are some of the biggest issues that we worry about, is that the kids are falling behind. We're putting that stress on them. They're putting it on them. We're putting it on us. We're putting it on people around us. We're getting angry about everything because we don't want this to happen. We don't want the slump to occur. I think it's again, I think we're going to have to worry about this and what we can do to fix it during the summer and in the fall, when we actually are in control of something that we can do. I think this is such an unusual situation, the quarantine. We're disconnected from lots of the things that support us, the resources we have. And I think it sometimes just calling it, we're done, we're going to do something else is the way to get through this. And what we have to do is figure out how to set things up in late summer, early fall to help deal with these. And again, I think mostly get some of these resources set up so that if we do have to do this again, we won't be in a situation where the kids are feeling overwhelmed, where they have to rely on a parent or a family member to help them, but that we have a system set up so they know exactly where to go and where to get help. So we're hoping, let's all hope that that's what we're going to be doing this fall. Okay, so I think I'm coming to the end. Maybe I can do one more. Important to keep in mind that some cases the person's parenting or grandparents who have been out of school system for some time and are thrust into the role of instructing. Yes. So we have a lot of intergenerational issues as well. Who is the person, if the parent is working and they're lucky enough to have grandparents in the home who can help out, or aunts and uncles, or other groups of people, older kids with younger kids, that the role of the instruction, again, anytime the parent and or someone else has to become the teacher, they're not trained to do this. So they're doing their best to try to do this. And that is influenced also by the socioeconomic status. So again, it is an issue. The resources are an issue. The ability of people in the home to provide these, to work, to teach, to do it at a level that's stimulating to the kid. But again, hopefully the schooling, I think this is where we can really respect the school environment and the teaching environment, this is where we need to figure out a way to make sure it's somewhat seamless. If you have to go back in the home, that you still have a schooling context that you can go to, and that's something we can figure out for the fall. So thank you all for these questions. They're excellent. And David, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. That was absolutely fantastic. I can't imagine a better way to launch this this new series. Great example of the kind of great work going on at ISR, incredibly topical and addressing issues that are on all of our minds and some the challenges that many people are dealing with every day. So thanks a lot, Pam. Thanks to the team that organized this, and everybody watch for future episodes of this wonderful series. And thanks, Pam, for the incredibly great start.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.